Hello, and welcome to the Rejuvenation Roundup podcast, where we explore the latest in life extension and anti-aging science with a dive into a month's worth of insights and new breakthroughs. This podcast is a combined effort of the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation, which operates Lifespan.io, and Future Grind, a podcast that explores the ethics and implications of emerging science and technology. I'm Ryan O'Shea, and I'll be your host. We hope you've had a spooky October, but it's now November, and there's a lot to cover. So let's get started. Remember, to find out more about any of these topics, you can visit lifespan.io/roundup. October was the month of MitoMouse, our second successful campaign with MitoSens. More than $75,000 has been donated to this month-long campaign, meaning that all of the stretch goals have been fulfilled. The goal of this study is to demonstrate the viability of the MitoSens strategy by showing that functional backup copies of mitochondrial DNA genes in the nucleus can replace their mutated counterparts in live animals. Thank you to everyone who participated by donating and spreading the word. Because of your efforts, one more important study will be done to bring us closer to solving the problem of age-related diseases. If you're interested in learning more about this project, on October 25th we hosted a Q&A webinar featuring Dr. Aubrey de Grey and others from the MitoSens team. They answered questions about MitoMouse and Sens in general, and the video of this webinar is available on our website. On a recently released episode of the LifeXtenShow, Leaf's Nicola Begala tackles the idea of indefinite dictatorships and explains the tyranny of aging itself. Here's a sample of that.
One frankly hilarious concern about life extension is that if we were to create life extension biotechnologies, tyrants, dictators, and more generally bad people around the world would make use of these therapies and extend their nefarious existences. Obviously, the exact same thing could be said of just about any other life-saving therapy or medical technology, including heart surgery and immunotherapy, and destroying or banning them to prevent bad people from accessing them and extending their lives doesn't seem especially fair to everyone else in the world who incidentally would be denied access too. Without life extension, the evil tyrant is guaranteed to die of old age if nothing else gets him first, but this won't necessarily end the tyranny. By the time the tyrant dies of old age, he's had plenty of time to appoint a successor, and that person might be even worse. To top this all off, if we were to patiently wait for nature to take its course, the people the tyrant would still rule over would have to endure not only his tyranny, but the diseases of old age as well, which would almost certainly kill many times more people than he would even in his own country, let alone in the rest of the world. The takeaway is that not developing life extension to prevent any dictatorship from lasting forever isn't the soundest of strategies. It would hardly help end dictatorships earlier, and it would most definitely exacerbate other problems we already have with healthcare, pensions, and horrific ends to human lives.
We've now made nearly all of the videos from our recent Ending Age-Related Disease conference available to the public. Among these was one from Dr. James Payer, founder and managing partner of Kronos Bioventures. He gave a super interesting, data-dense talk on biotech investments. Here's an in-depth look at some of that.
It's important to remember that this is a new problem. This longevity issue that we're facing is quite a new thing to come to the forefront of people's minds, because we are only now entering the fourth stage of what is called the demographic transition, as we go from a situation which is kind of the natural state of humans, where we have very high birth rates and very high death rates, and we evolve through this population explosion that happens in stage 2 towards a more stable population distribution where birth rates and death rates are relatively low. We're just entering that stage. So this issue of having old people around in large numbers dying of diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's and having complications like type 2 diabetes and osteoporosis and arthritis is a relatively new situation. 100 years ago, the 3 leading causes of death for humanity were influenza, tuberculosis, and pneumonia. And today, they're dementias, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. So I think this is kind of the key thing in understanding the why now of this longevity space is that we are in the midst of this demographic transition. The important thing to remember here is that as we get all of these older people in our society is not set up to support these people. So we come up with this economic problem, which is that already in the middle of this graph, right, we're just right here in the middle of this demographic shift. In the developed world, we already have a crisis of underfunded pension obligations as we make commitments to people who can't work in old age because they're going to get sick. And so this right now, according to Citibank, is about $78 trillion worldwide in unfunded or underfunded pension liabilities. And I think that you can make a credible case that the only way of averting this number getting even bigger and causing even more social and economic calamity is by making people live longer, healthier, so that they can contribute more to society, even in our rounded demographic curve. So this is a normalized occurrence rate. So every year you have a chance of getting a heart attack or getting cancer. And so if you plot the chances of getting cancer, what you'll see for all of these diseases is that the older you are, the higher your risk gets. And that's true for cardiovascular, cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, and kidney diseases. One of the things that we don't talk enough about in the aging space, but is critically important to understand why we think the technologies that the longevity biotech world is developing will be so powerful, is the issue of multimorbidity. And that is basically having more than one chronic condition at once that you have to deal with. By 75, about 41% of all people, 75 to 79, 41% of all people have at least two, more than half of those have more than two chronic conditions that they have to deal with. And then that number goes up and up and up as you get older. So people aren't just dealing with their atherosclerosis. They're dealing with diabetes. They're dealing with COPD. They're dealing with senility all at the same time. And so for that reason, this great analysis that was done by Dana Goldman and colleagues in 2013 showed that because there are all of these risks that come up together, if you just reduce risk and prevent one type of disease, let's say reducing cancer risk or reducing heart disease risk, you get almost no extension in the healthy lifespan. Almost no. This is like 75 years is the base case. 76 years is what you get by just reducing the risk of one disease. You reduce aging risk, all the age-related diseases together, by a smaller amount, and then that's only then can you see a huge jump in the average health span of people, let's put it that way. And there's a couple of interesting trends that have been happening in the biopharma space generally. The first is the phase at which acquisitions are happening. So most companies will ultimately get acquired by a pharmaceutical company who will then do the latest stage trials and then sell the drug. And those acquisitions have been happening earlier and earlier. Since 2013, the numbers of commercial and phase 3 stage companies have been going down in the stage of acquisition. So companies are being acquired earlier, and even though they're being acquired earlier, they're being acquired for larger amounts with less time spent on those companies. As an investor, these three facts are really exciting, right? It means that you're making more money faster, and you have to do less work to get there. And so, on one hand, that means this is a great time to be investing in biotech. But on the second hand, it also makes investors worried. Most new drugs today come from biotech startups. And this is a massive shift from what the world looked like 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you had the pharma companies. Pharma companies would either in-license stuff from academia, or they would do their own R&D, find drugs, and approve those drugs. In 2017, 75% of all of the approved drugs came from biotech startups. Many of them got acquired and were ultimately did the final trials from pharma, but that is also a hugely defining factor. That means that the vehicle of choice for getting an approved drug is a biopharma startup. Drugs that come from startups do better in the clinic than drugs from Big Pharma. So there is something that I find absolutely magical about the ability to take a very dedicated team, a founder and a founding scientists, and throw them into a problem and say, all right, you guys need to get this thing to work, and your company and everything that comes with it, many times reputation, many times validation of the scientific theory, all rides on getting this question right and answering this question in the right way. And that pays off in the long term, because when drugs ultimately launch, it's almost twice as good for a drug to start in a biotech company and get in-licensed to a pharma compared to internal development. All right. Total amounts of VC funding per round has been going up enormously in the last couple of years. That in 2018, Series A and B rounds, on average for biotech companies, were around $30 million. $30 million is a lot of money on a median. Seed rounds, however, are staying relatively small. 2-3 million is the normal there. IPO valuations have been going up and up and up for preclinical and phase 1 stage assets, but not for phase 3. You can draw two conclusions as you look at these 5 pieces of data. The first conclusion is, oh my God, this is absolutely the time to be doing a biotech startup in innovative drug development. The second conclusion is, crap, that looks a lot like a bubble. And if you look at the macroeconomic situation from when a lot of my data starts, right, from 2011 until now, the stock market's been riding high. We've been in this expansionary economy. And so a lot of investors that are thinking today about where I want to commit my money for a drug development program, right, they have to think, how is this market going to look 3, 4, 5, 10 years into the future? And there are some worrying signs for us that we have to be taking this risk of a bubble in biotech very, very seriously. And for those of you that don't know, 2018 was the biggest year of IPOs in biotech companies ever. There were over 60 IPOs. However, there was something a little bit disturbing that came along with these IPOs, which is that more than half of them declined, and a lot of them declined a lot in less than a year. What this means to me is that the public markets are really, really harsh on these early stage biotech companies. And many companies, because there's an exuberance, there's an IPO window there, they're jumping into the public markets, and then without even having to show any more data, just now that they're subject to public scrutiny of people who aren't there trading on the potential of the company, but are instead trading on like, what has the company done, they get hammered. And that makes private money and long-term investors to fund clinical development that much more important, potentially more important than it has ever been. But it also means that investment going forward in the next 5-6 years is probably going to have to be more disciplined, because I don't think that this IPO window with high valuations and freely available money, I don't think it's going to last. All right, so then that leads me to 5 quick conclusions about the biotech VC space. Number 1, I want to avoid exuberance as much as possible. Number 2, focusing on seed investments, getting in really early. I don't know, we didn't spend too much time on this, but round sizes aren't increasing there. And getting in early and following things through, the timing and the amounts make a lot of sense. Number 3, don't plan for the IPO ecosystem to continue the way it has been. Number 4, only exit when you have a clear value story and you are confident that you can actually back away from the project. Don't just throw it out into the world and see how it goes. And number 5, I think this is the most important. There are some cautionary things here, but I think that overall, the trend that we've been seeing in the biotech ecosystem will continue. I didn't spend time on the data here, but the main reason that a lot of this boom has been so exaggerated is that pharma R&D is changing fundamentally, right? Resources are going away from the big pharma companies doing R&D into biotech startups. And that space that's being created in drug development, it isn't being filled fast enough. So even though there's a lot of resources going into it and there's a lot of excitement, pharma companies still desperately need their pipelines to be filled and filled with good drugs. And so this space will continue to grow as this trend in moving to this more efficient way of creating drugs through biotech startup companies continues.
Also published were talks from Dr. Huda Soliman of Icaria Life Sciences, Dr. Vadim Gladyshev of Harvard Medical School, and Dr. Kevin Strange of Novo Biosciences. You can find these interviews and many more on our website at lifespan.io/roundup. And now for our research roundup. A human trial by Mayo Clinic researchers has shown for the first time that harmful senescent cells can be removed from the body by senolytic drugs. This has been demonstrated many times already in mice, but this is the first confirmation that these drugs remove senescent cells in the same way in people. The trial, which involved a small number of participants who had diabetes-related kidney disease, investigated if the combination of cancer drug dasatinib and the widely available supplement quercetin was able to remove senescent cells in people. The results were confirmed by analyzing factors present in the blood, as well as changes to the presence of senescent cells in both skin and fat tissue. Unfortunately, on its own, quercetin does not have a significant senolytic effect, which is possibly due to its limitations as a polyphenol. However, researchers in Poland recently conducted a study that used a nanoparticle-based delivery system to carry quercetin molecules to senescent cells in order to destroy them. They found that the nanoparticles were effective at attenuating inflammatory signals, that cells forced into early senescence via stress were destroyed by the nanoparticles, and that the secretion of inflammatory signals was reduced. Speaking of senescent cells, a study discussed in Nature shows that senescent cells can do even more damage than originally thought, as they can engulf and destroy neighboring healthy cells. Researchers at the Spanish National Cancer Center have generated mice in which 100% of their cells are derived from hyperlong telomere embryonic cells. They observed that these mice have longer telomeres and less DNA damage with aging. Hyperlong telomere mice are lean and show low cholesterol and LDL levels, as well as improved glucose and insulin tolerance. These mice also have less incidence of cancer and an increased longevity. These findings indicate that longer telomeres than normal in a given species show benefits. To find out more about the topics mentioned in our research roundup, visit lifespan.io/roundup. And now for some news nuggets. Juvenescence, an investment company that is focused on developing rejuvenation biotechnologies, has received its own investment funding from Sergey Young's Longevity Vision Fund. This gives it considerably more resources to use in its mission. By securing $4 million in funding from Juvenescence and Longevity Vision, Ligenesis, a biotechnology company focused on organ regeneration, is among those benefiting from these investments. Their technology uses lymph nodes as bioreactors to regrow functioning organs within a patient's own body. This financing will enable Ligenesis's lead program in liver regeneration to transition into clinical development, beginning with a Phase 2A clinical trial for patients with end-stage liver disease in 2020. That's it for this episode of the Rejuvenation Roundup podcast. Thank you very much for spending another month with us and for your help in the fight against age-related disease. Whether you're donating, spreading the word, or simply listening to our content, we appreciate your help. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and post about it on social media. This will increase our reach and introduce more people to the importance of life extension science. Don't forget, you can get additional deep dives into science, technology, and futurism on the Future Grind podcast. Find out more at futuregrind.org. Once again, I'm your host, Ryan O'Shea, and on behalf of the team at Leaf, we wanted to thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next time on the Rejuvenation Roundup podcast.